Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a wonderful returning guest. We have Jessica with us. How are you, Jessica?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, we are good. You know, Jessica and Landon and I and a whole bunch of others got to hang out at Sunstone. That was so fun. Was it 2 months ago? God, the time is flying, but it was at the University of Utah. It was so fun.
The concert the night before was more fun than Sunstone.
Okay. It's true. We did go to like a rockabilly concert
it was all
before.
fun.
Yep. And we learned that our other wonderful reoccurring guest, Ganesh, is a hell of a dancer.
Yeah.
And he tried to grab me. I said, no, I don't want to break anything. I'm a podcaster. But Jessica, of course, was braver. They went out there. I mean, they had a crowd forming around them. It was great. You were a team player because you never know when somebody asks you to dance what they're going to do. And he did everything. Like, I think he
he's
at one
impressive.
point.
Yeah. He is impressive.
Landon and I were just like, yeah. It was great. So, okay. So for those of you that didn't catch our previous episode with Jessica, and I will link that in the show notes because that was a really good one a while ago. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself briefly, and then we will dive in. We have a really interesting episode. And as soon as I put it all together, I thought, who would I like to invite on for this? No question, Jessica. So we're really happy that you're here.
Oh, thanks for asking me. I'm just kind of your typical post-Mormon, and I'm enjoying this space. And I highly recommend anyone out there, if they're kind of on the fence with reaching out and getting to know people in the space, to make the effort. It's an amazing community, and Sunstone is great. I haven't been to Thrive yet, but I hear it's amazing, and that's on my list. And yeah, it's just fun to come and hash out and process these things as we've deconstructed. And, all of us were, or at least most of us were, all in at one point. And now being on the other side of that, it takes some processing.
Yep, it does. No, and you're right. Community is there. And I always equate it to like being a veteran. You kind of, not that I was ever a veteran, but somebody that's gone through something the same as someone else, that you're on this you have this common ground. You kind of have this understanding that's just innate as soon as you start talking, and then you kind of process from there. So yeah, we've just had tons of fun with Jessica, getting to know her better. And again, she just reached out to us like a year and a half ago, like, hi, Jessica. We're like, hi. So yeah, it's really, really fun. And now we're good friends. So we love it. It's great. So all right, let us dive into our topic today, which I think is going to be really interesting. So lots of times I'll be over on Faithful social media, and I get a lot of ideas over there because, as Jessica reminded us just as we were talking right before the episode, a lot of things expressed over there are exactly how we all felt, some more recently than others. I mean, it's very easy to remember having the thoughts and feelings that are expressed over on some of these Faithful sites. So one post really kind of piqued my interest, and I thought this would be a really good topic to dive into on Mormonish. So I'm titling the episode, Does the LDS Church Have a Joseph Smith Problem? And this is some fabulous artwork showing Joseph Smith as a saint. So my interest was piqued by the next slide, which was a question posted on one of the subreddits. And I'm calling it was a sincere question from a current investigator. Of course, I said, I mean friend, because now if you have a missionary out or know a missionary, you know that they're no longer investigators. They're just called friends. So Landon, why don't you read this? Because this was the question that this person posed. And then there were hundreds of answers from faithful members trying to help this person. And so that's what we're going to go through on the rest of the podcast. And it's really enlightening, I found. So Landon, why don't you read this question, a sincere question from a current person who is wondering if they should join the church.
Okay, this friend looks a lot like Bill Rill.
It's just AI. I wrote a questioning man, and you're right. It did come up with something. And he is a questioning man, right? So there you go.
Must know. Okay, it says, I've been getting to know the LDS Church, and honestly, it's been a wonderful journey. Everyone from the missionaries to the congregation members has been incredibly welcoming, and I genuinely enjoy the community vibe at services every Sunday. Recently, the topic of baptism came up. The missionaries feel I'm ready and even suggested a date. Here's where I hit a bit of a roadblock, my feelings about Joseph Smith.
And now go like this. Bum, 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 bum.
Despite my positive experiences, I'm struggling to wholeheartedly accept him as a prophet. mainly due to a barrage of negative info from friends and various sources, negative meaning true. They point out some pretty tough criticisms about his life and actions, which has really made it hard for me to see him in the prophetic light the church does. I've been trying to balance these views with church texts like the Saints book, aiming to get a fuller picture. But there's this nagging feeling that I might be missing parts of the story. It's a bit like trying to solve a puzzle with some pieces hidden away. I'm reaching out to you all because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's faced something like this. How did you guys handle doubts about Joseph Smith, especially with so much controversial information out there? Did it affect your decision about baptism? Also, do you think the church overall has a Joseph Smith problem, where his historical controversies impact people's view on the church today?
So that's a great question. Very insightful, very thought out. I mean, doesn't sound like a troll or anything, just somebody that really wants to know. Jessica, think about when you were a member. Did that ever nag at you? Did you ever go, God, Joseph Smith? I mean, I think we're of an age where he was perfect, right? When we were growing up, you never heard anything. And then we're older, we're adults, we have our own kids, and you start hearing or reading some stuff. I mean, how did you navigate that? Did you just say, not even concerned, or did you, like this person, start to have some nagging feelings?
Well, there were a few nagging feelings. Mostly I just, swallowed the pill I was given with everything about Joseph Smith. And I did have I remember having some spiritual experiences, confirmation that I thought was a spiritual confirmation when I would hear stories about him, or it was the correlated whitewash stories about the first vision or things like that. But I do remember a few times. Once I went to Nauvoo. I was in Stake Young Women's. We were living in Cincinnati, and we went to Nauvoo with the Priests and Laurels. And I was floored by the Joseph Smith worship, to the point that, and I was really in, but I kind of looked around. I thought, is this the Church of Joseph Smith?
Wow.
And, it was a little shocking. And then the other time that I noticed kind of a sharp, I realized how elevated he was when, do you remember when, you probably don't, but when the guy won the Tony for Book of Mormon, the music, or is it the Book of Mormon, the musical?
Yeah, no,
and he got up, and I only saw the newsreel of it. I didn't watch the Tonys, but I saw the newsreel. And he said something like he's holding his trophy, and he says something like his Tony, and he's holding it. He said, "Hey, Joe, you got a Tony," or something. And I remember just being so offended by referring to Joseph Smith as Joe. And then I kind of checked myself, and I thought, why am I offended by that? That's ridiculous. And so he is elevated. He's never referred to as Joe, Joey, anything. It's never even referred to as Smith. It's the prophet Joseph Smith. Or Joseph Smith. Or our beloved prophet Joseph. It is never, he is elevated in any type of discussion.
Yeah, no, I love that term. He's elevated. The only thing he was missing was a middle initial, right? I never thought about that until just now.
I thought about that once, that he doesn't have one. You're right. It is odd that he doesn't, but yeah.
No, so elevated is the word. When I first moved into the house I'm living in now 20 years ago, it was an old pioneer chapel, like on the historic register or something. And they were kind of renovating it, and they discovered in the primary room, just behind some paneling, there was a picture of Joseph Smith back there. Like, it had been something, I think they covered it up maybe because maybe the look wasn't good or something, but it was there for a long time. I think a lot of investigators and people walking into the church are like, where are the pictures of Jesus? I think they're doing a lot better now, but it used to really be all things Joseph Smith. Do you remember that, Landon? We're all kind of a similar age, so.
Yeah, when I was growing up, Joseph Smith was the bomb. That everything was a testimony of Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon that he translated. You could not listen to conference without Joseph Smith being mentioned and being praised. We sang praise to the man all the time, and those were all of it. And I was completely bought in. I thought that he was the guy who'd restored the gospel. And I always look to him as someone to look up to. But that was also the downfall of my testimony, because my initial downfall came when I started researching the Book of Abraham, and once I realized that, wait a minute, this is not a translation. He got this wrong. And then I started digging in, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. There's a lot of things he got wrong, a lot of things he claimed that didn't happen. And as I started digging in, it was actually while I was reading the book Rough Stone Rolling that I just had the epiphany and set the book down and said, this is all bullshit. Because I was reading about the 37 wives that he had, the Fanny Alger affair, the Kirtland Bank, and the way that he had tricked people out of the money. You start listening, and people say, "Oh, Joseph, he was misunderstood, or he's only a man. He's fallible. He has issues." It's like, he was not just a man; he was a bad man by everything that we would judge somebody a bad man. As a LDS, he did. He conned people. He was sleeping with their wives. He was taking them away from with young girls. He was. You can just start naming things, and if you name those traits in any person today, everyone would say, "Oh my gosh, what a horrible person this person is." But somehow we worship him. I didn't understand. So Joseph Smith was someone I praised, but he was also the downfall of my testimony, because I just could not, when I saw what he was doing and how it was portrayed by the church, I was like, wow, I've been sold a bill of goods here that is not good.
Well, see, and there you are. And that's after decades in the church. This investigator friend is like, I can kind of see it pretty clearly right up front. And I don't know if I want to commit. And interesting, you had mentioned conference. I don't have it on the slide, but I just used it on the newscast. You know how Nemo has that Jesus, Joe, and Rusty, where he counts up the number of quotes. So Jesus, in this last conference, which happened 55 times, a mention of Jesus, Russell Nelson 58 times, but Joseph Smith 9 times. They know there's a problem, and they're phasing that out. They are not talking about him like they used to, because they know. So let's go to the next slide. And what I did is I went through, like I said, there were hundreds of answers to try to help this investigator, try to help frame Joseph Smith, his life, his decisions, his actions in a way that's more palatable, that will allow this person to get baptized. And I'm trying to remember, I think this post actually might have eventually been deleted. It's either this one or another podcast, but this possibly was, I'm not sure, which, I can kind of understand it. But I kind of categorized these comments from faithful members into 16 categories. So I'm calling this 16 reasons we do not have a Joseph Smith problem, because they were able to come up with probably a lot of reasons, as Jessica brought up earlier, that we all did at the time. I mean, we can't all be like Landon, who just said, nope, I'm out, right? Taps out.
That was after 4 years of researching.
After
that I finally,
4 years.
While I was reading, I went, this just confirms everything that I'd been told was lies. It just, the church's book just confirmed it.
So. No, and it's funny because that's actually one of the slides is a faith promoting thing coming up. So but a lot of us just kind of go along with these reasons until someday it just becomes too much and we don't anymore. Others are able to see it right away and just kind of tap right out. So we're going to go through each reason. I kind of put them in categories, has several, and these are real quotes from real faithful people. You might recognize your friends and family out here. So we'll just kind of take turns reading through these reasons and we'll discuss them. So I'll read the first one. The first one that was a big one, a lot of them said, just don't pay any attention. It's probably all lies about him, right? That's one of the ideas that you have to tell yourself. So somebody said, while recognizing that certain parts of his life are unsavory in modern light, there it is, modern light, I also recognize the implications of his claims. If what he said and did is true, then wouldn't it also track that the adversary to the truth would make every effort possible to spread the lies, misinformation, anger, misunderstanding, and doubt about a prophet of the restoration? He wasn't a perfect person. None of us are, but the fruits speak for themselves. Well, that quote is very problematic altogether. I'm going to read all three on the page. I know Jessica's already kind of rolling her eyes. When I sent her the slideshow, she's like, oh my gosh, I can't, I'm like, we have to for the post-Mormon podcasting world. So I'm going to go through each of these quotes and then we'll just kind of pull out pieces that we want to talk about. So another person in the same vein said, you will run into this in some form for the rest of your life. Just about any Reddit post that mentions Utah or Mormons ends up having some comments about Joseph being a pedophile, sleeping with married women, etc. It's hard to not feel bad and a bit ashamed. Sometimes the things people say can be pretty convincing, but looking closer, you'll see that the evidence is actually pretty weak and unsubstantiated. We see it all the time in politics, twisting things around and repeating it over and over. Same concept here. Another person said, a lot of criticisms from anti-Mormon sources are based on half-truths and are twisted in some way. The LDS Church has become more transparent about its history, so there's no need to rely on these facts from sources that may not present the whole picture. So they're trying to protect their worldview of Joseph just by saying these are liars that are trying to tell us this stuff. What did you think about these quotes when you read these in this reason, Jessica?
Well, the first one, when they say an adversary to the truth would make every effort possible to spread lies. I mean, that is just absurd. And we hear that over and over again, that because there's all this negative information, well, that means the church is true. Because Satan wouldn't want it, to the truth to come forth and all of that. So that is just, it's such a ridiculous argument, but it's a common one. But then the other one that's so infuriating is it wasn't a perfect person.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we should have him be at the standard of near perfection if he's going to speak for God and lead God's one true church. But even aside from that, if you can just kind of look at it and say, no, I can accept someone's humanity.
Mm-hmm.
But like Landon was saying, this was a monster in all forms. He was taking people's money. There were also, I know you mentioned the Kirtland Safety Society, the banking, plus, the coercion of children and of women. But also then weren't there land deeds and things that he did there? And then they would all have to suddenly move because he was wanted by the police.
Exactly.
And, all of that was just, and then their land was worthless or, the land deals, what did he do? Like buy the land and then sell it back to them at like 300% markup?
Exactly. Yeah. Just manipulating and taking advantage of people. Right. So much worse than just a normal person. Like even the standard of a normal person.
Yes. This is like corruption at every level.
Yeah. Yep.
And that no one's asking for perfection.
Yep.
And that's a thought stopping. Well, he wasn't perfect,
and
it's just, accept it. He's not perfect. So it's hard to swallow that. And it's infuriating. And that's a person you can't really even engage and have just a dialogue about it with. They won't listen.
Yeah, I think that's true. What do you think, Landon? It's all lies. Is it all lies?
Well, this last paragraph where it says a lot of criticism from anti-Mormon sources are based on half-truths or twisted in some ways. Then they go on to say the LDS Church has become more transparent. Why did they have to become more transparent? Well, because they were telling half-truths and twisting the narrative, and they had to straighten it out. So it's the church that's been telling the lies. And I will tell you, when I went into my faith crisis, I started reading and I started looking and I said, I will only go to faithful sources to find this information. And I went out of the church following only faithful sources.
I did too.
I looked at the internet. I looked up BYU and what they had to say on the translation of the Book of Abraham. And there it was right from BYU that nothing in the translation of those meant anything that Joseph said. As I said, I was reading Rough Stone Rolling. That's a book by a church historian, sold at Deseret Book. It talks about the Fanny Alger case, which was, the claims of it come from Oliver Cowdery wrote that he was guilty of adultery and accused him of being an
apostle. Yeah.
Guilty of the second. They were co-presidents of the church at the time.
Oh, that's true. At that
and
time,
he's being accused of that by the co-president of the church. It wasn't anti-Mormons that were accusing him of that. His polygamy. he clearly got up and said he wasn't practicing polygamy, and said it publicly. But church resources, all the church, they didn't say this before, but now you read the essays that the church puts out on polygamy, and Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy, and that Fanny Alger, the one he was accused of having the affair with, was probably one. He married underage girls. The church sources are clear about that he did. All of these things we were saying can be found in faithful sources. This isn't anti-Mormons twisting the truth. This is anti-Mormons simply shining a light on the truth of the documents that the church had kept hidden for so long, and now are showing up, forcing the church to become transparent.
Whew, that's true. What were you gonna? I think you were going to say something, Jessica.
Well, no, I was going to point out too, Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated for calling that out.
Yes.
Yep.
That's a very good point. No, and one of the things they mentioned in conference is they warned everybody about doomsday scrolling, meaning, going down these dark rabbit holes. I think they called it, of anti-Mormon information. And I had to make a meme, a Trexmo somewhere else, where they said, stop that doomsday scrolling. And the person's like, I'm literally on the church website, exactly. Stop that doomsday scrolling, because it's true. It's all right there. And you just have to dig in. It's not anti-Mormon sources. It's simply truth and history. So anyway, but that's one that comforts people. There's lies. And that's a way to just put it behind you and not think about it. Another one, focus on your testimony of the Book of Mormon, not on Joseph Smith. This is quite a number of quotes. You want to take this on, Jessica? The idea that you can somehow separate the two. Don't worry about Joseph Smith, just the Book of Mormon. They don't quite follow it to its logical conclusion.
That's why the missionaries are so keen to focus on you finding a testimony of the Book of Mormon, because it's true. Then everything else is as well. He would had to have been a prophet. The restoration must have actually happened. And the church, which espouses the book, must have that restored truth and authority.
There it is. If the book's true, he's true. That's kind of the concept.
Yeah, and it's true. Yeah, it's fact. Yeah.
Yep.
When in doubt, it's best to examine your testimony of the Book of Mormon and start there. If it's true, he was a prophet. No two ways about it. My testimony is anchored in the Book of Mormon. I can say with certainty that it is the word of God, because of my experiences with the Spirit, not to mention literary and historical proofs. If that is true, then Joseph Smith is a prophet chosen by God to bring it forth, period. All my concerns are directed back to that. They should watch the John Lundwall episode.
Yeah, they should. But
no. Okay, for those who do not have a testimony of the restoration, there may be a Joseph Smith problem, because his controversies are weighted against only his worldly accomplishments, which is why the world outside the church has long had and will continue to have issues with him. But when you factor in his work for the gospel of Christ, there's really no contest. He was a great prophet who fulfilled the designs of the Lord. I have to admit, there are no rose-colored glasses towards JS for me. However, in all caps, the issue is somewhat decoupled for me from my testimony. Is the Book of Mormon what it purports to be? Was it directed by God? Is the book true? Okay, I have to pause there for a second.
Go ahead.
What does that even mean?
Exactly. What does
the book
it mean?
True? Or the quote that drives me bonkers, and it did as a little girl, and it still does today, is it's the most correct book ever written. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's cyclical. If
the
prophet is a prophet, exactly. He translated a book.
Correct by what?
Yep.
Anyway, okay. Is the book?
No, I know. I knew we were going to have a hard time, like stopping every sentence.
I know.
Let's try to go through the quotes, but
okay.
That circular logic, it just like boggles the mind. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Is the book true? That it has a bearing on whether or not I believe the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the Savior's restored church. A testimony is available through the Holy Ghost in that regard. That is an anchor to the restored gospel if we have pursued the invitation at the end of the Book of Mormon.
So Moronish.
They mean if we.
Yeah, we did pursue. Yeah, again, these are just written by people, so just kind of paraphrase if you have to. So
okay.
And I think there's one more. Yeah.
Okay, I guess I have a question for you. Have you applied Moroni's promise?
There you go.
It's found in the Book of Mormon, Moroni 10, 3-5. Have you received a witness from the Spirit that the book is true? I ask because, as Joseph Smith said, the Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion. Simply this means the Book of Mormon is true. Joseph's first vision is true, and so forth. If you get a witness from the Spirit, you know it's all true. John 16:13.
Wow. So do you remember yourself, Jessica, at all having these thoughts that I know the Book of Mormon's real, therefore Joseph must be okay? That's kind of what they're
You know
saying.
what? Even at my most believing, no, I never could
Like, no,
get behind
no,
reading.
no.
I mean, the Book of Mormon was always total swill to me. I honestly, it was painful to read.
Right.
And I remember hearing, I think I was like 18 or something, and I was reading I was getting really into Jane Austen. I was loving Jane Austen. And
I
I
love
heard
Jane Austen.
this derogatory quote from Mark Twain about Jane Austen, and I was so offended. And then shortly after, I heard his quotes on the Book of Mormon, and they're like chloroform in print. And then if you take away all the it came to pass,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, all those things. And I thought they were so funny. And I remember thinking to myself, why was I offended about Jane Austen? And I'm not offended about the Book of Mormon.
Because you know Jane Austen is true, and so
Yes,
do I, and I
her
still
books
believe
are
that to this
correct.
day. That's right. Mr. Darcy is real. I know it. Landon's like, who the hell's Mr. Darcy? No. But yeah, I see what you're saying. You never kind of went that way, but you know, they're just claiming you just go on your feelings, right? Moroni's promise. Believe in the Book of Mormon. And if the book is true, then that means the person who is involved in bringing it forth has to be a good person. It's just that circular, what do you call that kind of logic, Landon?
I'd say circular logic. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what
Yeah. No, I think so. Did you, in your wildest TBM days, have these ideas, or did you never connect the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon to the character of Joseph Smith, meaning that one can inform the other?
No, I 100% agree with this person that if the Book of Mormon is true, that Joseph Smith really translated it and received it from an angel in gold plates, that this would be he would be a true prophet. That doesn't mean this would be the true church, because there's multiple churches that came from Joseph Smith. So how do you know this is the true one?
Right.
Just by reading the Book of Mormon, you have to look at other questions. The problem is when you look and say, is the story true? Because if the Book of Mormon is not true, then he's a con artist and a fraud. So we have to look at his history. What has he translated? What did he claim to translate? And which of those are true? He translated 5 different things that he claimed to have translated. The Kinderhook plates, which anyone who's familiar with the Kinderhook plates, those have been proven to be a fraud plate, but he translated them and said that they were an ancient record. So Kinderhook plates. Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. We now know from BYU studies that this was he was plagiarizing that from who was it that he was plagiarizing the book from?
Adam Clark.
Adam Clark's
one of many plagiarizing sources.
We
know that.
Yep. He wrote the Book of Abraham, or he translated the Book of Abraham. Been completely debunked that any of the things that he claimed. I mean, we have the scrolls, we have the pictures, we have the facsimiles, and we can now translate them into because they're Egyptian, and we now can read Egyptian.
Right.
But in 1830, complete fraud. It's a complete fraud. Book of Moses. That wasn't even translated. That was revealed. But again, we can prove that the Book of Moses is a complete fraud. And the Book of Mormon. So we look at the other 4 things that he was a fraud. We know he was arrested for being a con man and a fraud. And now we read in the Book of Mormon and we find nothing but anachronisms. And when you say it's true, that means it's historically true, not just gospel true, because it couldn't be true if it's not historically true. And when she says that, I mean, completely disingenuous to say that there's proof of it being true. There is not an archaeological anything that proves the Book of Mormon is true. Not a single one. So, you know, again, you check the facts, you check the background, it doesn't check out. He was a con man. He conned us on 5 different books that he claimed, and all 5 can be demonstrably proven false.
Wow. There you go. Make a timestamp. That's a great short, Landon. You pretty much went through the whole episode in like 6 minutes. I love it. But again, this person is saying just trust your feelings. If you feel the book's correct, its translator must be correct. And that's
and we need to make one statement. He did this looking at a rock in a hat that he used to dig for buried treasure with.
there is that.
So
There is that, but none of us knew that. None of us believed South Park.
Oh, I know.
Nobody knew it. No one knew it until later. And you're like, wait, South Park was right? What? All right, let's forge ahead. We're only on number 2. We're already getting so spicy. Okay. You can read this one, Landon. The idea that, you know what, lots of prophets were not so great. That was another theme.
Well, there's a sales pitch.
Yeah, I have a picture of drunken Noah, because that's always the example. There's Noah laying on the ground. Oh, the loincloth that his son is I think trying to either hold up or pull off. I know, I'm not sure. But yeah, you know,
that's really in motion there.
I agree. So the idea, lots of prophets suck, right? So Landon, why don't you read that?
If you read closely throughout the Old and New Testament, as well as the Book of Mormon, you will find that many, if not all, prophets are pretty controversial in their days. Some are even so controversial that they are killed, and Jesus Christ himself wasn't free of controversy. The Bible is full of prophets who did bad things. Imagine how people dealt with ancient prophets like Abraham or Moses. It can sometimes be easy to accept them as prophets because they are already included in what we have accepted as scripture, to the point that it is difficult to think of them as anything other than being a prophet. But they were human. They made mistakes. The people at the time didn't always trust them. Sure, they made prophecies and performed miracles, but not everyone saw those miracles firsthand, and they didn't always live to see the prophecies fulfilled. So how were people back then supposed to accept prophets as prophets? It will take some faith. It will take prayer and spiritual confirmation. Joseph Smith wasn't a perfect man. Neither was Moses, and neither was the Apostle Peter. Yet somehow God still showed them to have their position of spiritual leadership to preach the gospel. Was Joseph Smith a good guy? Well, wait a second. That question doesn't really have a bearing on where I'm headed with my faith.
I have to say,
and the answer is no.
Yes, I came across that statement a lot, and it was surprising to me that people said, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect my testimony if he did all the things they said. That's kind of next level to me.
The fact that they have to say that indicates there's a Joseph Smith problem.
Yeah. All right.
In fact, she goes on to say, maybe he was a real turd. Maybe he was a real gem. Either way, it doesn't really affect my trajectory. Does it have implications about church leadership in general? Yeah, that's fair. Not all prophets are pioneering heart surgery like President Nelson, but that's out of the general question here. The question is whether or not this is Christ's restored church. If the Book of Mormon is true, then the foundational question here is answered. Of course, if Joseph Smith is lying, the Book of Mormon can't be true. So
they cannot go there. They cannot disconnect the Book of Mormon with Joseph Smith. They cannot separate it. In all these hundreds of comments I read through, they can't. It's really an interesting phenomenon.
Oh, sorry. While all prophets and biblical characters have issues other than Jesus Christ, all the others repented, such as David's murder. Apostle Paul's persecution of the new believers, Joseph seemed to hide or continually denied his sins. This was almost a deal breaker for me, so I understand your concerns.
Okay, so there's somebody that's being honest. He's saying, yeah, there were some questions that I see. So, but whether that means they'll act on it or change the trajectory of their life, I don't know. What do you think about this idea that he's just in good company? All prophets, Landon, probably were not so great, but God works through these imperfect beings.
So let's take a step further. How do we know that these men were prophets? They just said, oh, simply because it's in the Bible, we have to accept it? No, we don't have to accept that. The Bible could be just as untrue as the Book of Mormon is.
Oh, don't go there.
Yeah, you can ask yourself those questions. Most scholars now say Moses never existed.
Exactly.
There is absolutely zero archaeological proof of any kind of leaving Egypt and going out into the wilderness.
Exodus. Yeah.
The Exodus. There is no flood. We know from geological foundations that there is no flood. So we're supposed to believe Noah, but there is no flood. We know that. DNA has proven that Adam never existed. There was no man and woman, first man and woman. The DNA clearly shows the population that existed when that came. So we start let's fact check some of these things. And when we start fact checking, we start finding out all of it's true. This idea that, hey, well, it's in the Bible, so you have to accept it here because you can find the same problem in the Bible. No, two problems don't make a solution. Two problems just make two problems. And that's what we're seeing here.
That is what we're seeing. Did you ever have that argument used on you at all, Jessica? If you ever had a question that, lots of prophets have problems. He's just one of many.
Yeah, I have heard that. I heard that before, the term I've often heard is, well, they're all products of their generation.
Yep.
Things like that. And so I don't know. I mean, you have to make negotiations, period.
Yep.
You just do. And I know a lot of other faiths, though, or I've come to discover a lot of other faiths, they don't take the scriptures literally.
Exactly.
They take them as, okay, there's some verses here that we'd like to use that can apply to our lives. And some of these others, no, I don't think they serve us well. We're not going to emphasize that. And so certain faiths have a much healthier association with the scriptures, whereas in the LDS church, you have to accept all of it. You have to sustain. You have to, you covenant, you sacrifice your whole life for the church. So the stakes are much higher. And it's a different argument than for other faiths and for others. And really, when they're asking in the temple and everything, and you're making all these covenants, you're not making the covenants with the Bible. It's all with the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants. It's actually mostly Doctrine and Covenants, I would say. Because I don't think the church even really follows the Book of Mormon.
No, that is such a good point. I'm so glad you brought that up. No, you were just the perfect person to talk about this with. And it reminds me of a guest that we had on who was a reverend. She was a female reverend at a college. And she said the very same thing. She said, wow, you guys are really unique. I'm Christian. I have couple thousand years of wiggle room. We're just what you said, Jessica. This applies, or maybe this was meant like this. It's, there's so much more wiggle room, and the idea to see it as allegorical. This reverend said to us, you guys have a written history that is absolutely brand new. It's only 200 years old. Everything was written down by your founders, by your apostles, by your prophets. There's no wiggle room, except for to say they were speaking of a man, all those problematic things. It's like, it's real. It's right there. You cannot ignore it. It is in your face. It is so recent that it must be literal. It must be given some kind of credence. And that's extremely problematic when it comes to the behavior of people. So very, very good observations.
Although now we have temporary commandments.
Now we have temporary commandments. Oh my goodness. That is just the crazy. Yeah. I just can't wait to see where they go with that.
Oh, they're going to make hay of that one. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we're all watching. So, Landon, I'll read this one, but then you can answer first, because here's what you were just talking about.
Here's your book.
Yeah, here it is. And a lot of people said, again, like I'm saying, these are just representational quotes. For every quote I read, there were like 10 that I didn't, that said the same thing, same kind of way to spin it. So number 4 is, don't worry about the facts, read Rough Stone Rolling. There you go. So this person said, I've been reading Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling. It's by an LDS scholar and includes many historical and contextual information that is often left out of church lessons, not maliciously. It's just not inherently spiritual info, so it's not known by many. Laugh break. Yeah. The book, but again, this is a faithful person and this is how they see it. The book has been great at exposing me to things I didn't know about Joseph and talking about how reputable or not many of his antagonists were. And that's always a tactic. Somebody says something about Joseph, you've got to examine that person and his character and rip him to shreds, whether he's an apostle or whatever. You have to do that. It's blame them, it's attack ad hominem all there. Okay. It isn't an official church book, so the opinions there aren't officially the church's, but it has been an interesting read. That being said, my belief that Joseph Smith was a prophet is quite independent of the facts that I've learned about him. Again, they are just able to separate it. And I included on this slide a quote by Richard Bushman, the author of Rough Stone Rolling, where he says, for the church to remain strong, it has to reconstruct its narrative. The dominant narrative is not true. It can't be sustained. So what do you think of this spin, Landon, on Rough Stone Rolling, where they read it? And I've heard this from others, even family members. I read it and it's great. I have more respect for him. He's a normal person with normal problems. And
Yeah, go ahead and read it. I encourage you to read it because you'll find out a bunch of things you didn't know about him. And why didn't you know about him? Because they didn't want you to know about those things about him. And that's what was so frustrating to me, was all the things that I would run into on my mission that I was told, oh, he was a gold digger. He was a treasure digger. I didn't even know what that meant. You know, I thought he was a gold miner or something.
Yeah.
And you'd ask the mission president, oh, that's all anti-Mormon lies. You know, that he was married and was to 37 women. No, that's not true. That he practiced polygamy, that he was with young girls. All of that gets confirmed in this book. Everything I'd been taught about Joseph Smith as being true or as being false anti-Mormon lies, in this book, they said, no, we know this all. And they go through and show how they knew all of this stuff. And then they say, but you can't judge him for that. This is written by an LDS historian who wants to make Joseph Smith look good despite the facts. And you can see it in the book. And once you do that, that's when I set it down and said, you guys are making crap up just to get to this point. One of the things he said was that Joseph Smith practiced what we'd consider magic worldview, as preparation for receiving the priesthood.
A preparatory
Are
priesthood.
You kidding me?
Yeah.
Every time I'd heard that he practiced magic, I was told that's absolutely not true. And it's without a doubt true. And the book has to recognize that and has to show that. And these people saying, oh, they talk about how you can't believe how reputable the people who were talking against Joseph Smith were. In the paragraph, in the page before, they were saying, it doesn't matter whether Joseph Smith's reputable. I can just overlook his. But hey, if this person has one problem, he was a drunk. Oh, well, he said something bad about Joseph Smith.
Can't tell the truth.
Can't believe him. He's a drunk. But Joseph Smith can be carousing with women, sleeping with children, etc., and it has no impact on whether he's a prophet or not.
Yeah, it's a lot of mental gymnastics. That is absolutely for sure. Did you ever read this book, Jessica, or did you just kind of say enough?
I did. I had to
check.
I had to renew it. I had to renew it 3 times from the library. It is that much of a slog.
Wow. And you were faithful when you were reading.
No, this was when I was starting to deconstruct the church.
Okay.
So that was why I was determined.
Oh, okay. What was your perspective on it then, where you already were kind of like, I got to find out what's happening?
Yeah, I did. And I read it and I was surprised, and I wasn't. I knew I was going to find things I wasn't going to like. But the thing that struck me that was so fascinating to me is Richard Bushman has this incredible gift to take the most fascinating story, the most salacious gossip and everything, and twist it into the most dull narrative you've ever, I mean, it is a slog. And it's an interesting story. It should not be as boring as it is. And I think that was intentional. I
think you're right.
Really wanted people to be entertained. And I think that's why your family members, oh, I read it. It's great.
It's nothing. Yeah, it's
blah,
blah. Got the married sisters, mother, daughter, blah, blah, blah. When or another book, you'd go, wait, hold up.
Yeah. No, he doesn't.
Hold up, mother, daughter, but no, blah, 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 and the priesthood, mother, daughter, blah, 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 sister pairs.
Yeah, no, it was not
such a good observation. Yep,
it was not written well. It was not. The entertainment factor was not there at all. And it was on purpose.
No, I think you're right. And that goes along with inoculation, which is, what they do with the youth and the seminary programs. Everybody knows these stories now. They all know it's a rock and a half. They all know he married sisters and, and mother-daughter pair. It's nothing. They know it, and they know it in such a, like you said, I don't know, just matter of fact way.
Very dull. And I mean, it's like the general conference voice. I don't think they want people to listen that closely. I think they want it to just filter in while they're falling asleep.
No, you're right. There's actually, and I've read studies on this, a sing-song voice that can kind of put you to sleep. We try to do it here on Mormonish. In conference where you just, you absorb certain information, but it's in another part of your brain. You're not critically thinking as you're taking it in, because the voice is just like, and I watched a video on how many different cults will use this technique. So you absorb this information, you internalize it, but it never goes through the critical thinking process that you would if you heard it in a different way. And I think that's true of books that are written that way, and when information's presented like that. So I can see that. Wow, that is just fascinating. Okay, let's forge ahead. Seriously, we could have a whole episode on every slide. Dang it, why do I always do this to myself? It's like so interesting. Okay, I think it's Jessica's turn to read. This is number 5, and this I read a lot. It says he's a prophet. Nothing else matters. That's it.
Okay. Joseph Smith's life is far from completely recorded, and contradictory sources exist. So in addition to what many others have said about the topic, it's okay not to understand everything about him or his actions. Just like you only need to understand enough about the church to know if you want to join. You only need to know enough to learn he is a prophet or not. And then the next quote. If you think he did a prophetic work by bringing forth the Book of Mormon and or establishing the church and restoring the priesthood, then it doesn't really matter if he was also a sinner in this way or that.
I mean, that's one of the saddest ways to explain it.
I mean, he belonged in jail. He was arrested. I mean, he really, yeah. It's
yep, it's just the idea that he's a prophet. And that's just a given. In their minds, they cannot think of it any other way. So everything else just bounces off. He's a prophet. Woo, doesn't matter. He's a prophet. Woo, you just cannot entertain that he called himself a prophet. And, he fabricated all of his prophetic accomplishments. They just can't fathom that. What do you think, Landon?
Joseph Smith's life is far from completely recorded. I know very few people in the history of the world who have been recorded more than Joseph Smith's life. Have they heard of the Joseph Smith papers? And entire years were spent pulling the papers and the recorded history of this man's life. And this is the reason they have a Joseph Smith problem. Yep. The more people get to see the recorded life of Joseph Smith, the more concern it raises. Yep. And this is exactly, again, when this person says, it really doesn't matter if he was also a sinner in this way or that. They're conceding the point. Yeah, exactly. So he's probably a sinner and not a great guy, but it doesn't matter.
That's right. I love the church.
We have a Joseph Smith problem. Now they're saying, well, Joseph Smith's a problem, so let's focus on the Book of Mormon, not Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
And the Book of Mormon causes many problems. So
yep. That is a problem too. What do you mean by that, Jessica? You're right.
Well, it's a big problem. I mean, there's more and more irrefutable evidence that it did not happen.
Exactly.
And they can't escape that. And I don't know how they're going to twist that one, because
I don't either.
That's the foundation of the church. I mean, just recently, I don't know if you watched, was it like a month ago when John Lundwall went on Mormonism Live about the shipbuilding?
Yep.
I mean, that's one more layer.
And that's one tiny part. That's the thing.
No, and it's that. And John even said as a kid, he heard it, he accepted it, he didn't think twice. He said, but then when you stop and think about it, and he said, and it's presented as a historical fact. Yep. It's presented as a historical text. You have to accept that and then decide from there. You can't just say, well, it was symbolic. It was,
Yeah,
anyway,
no.
It's really interesting. And then all the work he's done about the book itself being.
Yeah. No, he's such a valuable resource to everybody, just to kind of crack your brain open and help you think about things.
Yeah.
I mean, I admit lots of things I accepted as a given. Nephi built a ship. Of course he did. Move on. What else? Never thought twice, and then there's a point where your brain cracks open and you get some information like Dr. Lundwall and you're like, wait a minute. And then you can't unsee that. And you start thinking about all the process. And that's just one tiny little part of it.
I know.
So, yeah, it hurts your brain.
And so when it all adds up and they just can't, I don't know, they've presented it as historical fact.
Yeah. Well, and to a lot of us, they presented it as children. And so it's a given. You do not question it. You don't think around it. It's just something that happened. And it's really hard to see around that. Many people, my parents included, lived and died believing every single thing was a historical fact, a literal fact, something that really happened, It's interesting. So, okay. So 5, that's a good one. Let's go on to number 6. I think, Landon, it's your turn. The real problem is hero worship, not Joseph, meaning people put him up on a pedestal. Who could possibly live up to that, right? And I have a painting here of him in his general's costume. I assume most of you understand that he did like to wear and dress up like a self-proclaimed general. Landon's in the military. I don't know if that's how it works, but of the Nauvoo Legion, I think, and he would have a a ring. He had a diamond ring, I think, and a walking stick. And as I understand it, he might have often been smoking a cigar. I think I read that somewhere. So, but here he is in his wonderful general's costume, and he had himself painted there. So, Landon, do you want to take this? And first of all, can you appoint yourself general in the military?
No, or everyone would appoint themselves general.
Well, he did.
Yes. I want to add, though, that there is a lot of hero worship around Joseph Smith and has been since the 1830s. I tend to agree with that. If anything, the emphasis is currently being placed on the wrong stuff. Some members of the church treat Joseph Smith as infallible, and that's a problem. Other members reject his good works because his bad works fall short of some perfect standard they think he must live up to. The problem we sometimes have is that church members in the past, and some still now, tend to deify the prophets. They are honored in their roles, but they themselves are just like everyone else. Joseph Smith was remarkable in many ways, but was not perfect. The reason he is honored as much as he is because the Lord trusted him to restore the gospel. Now, I wonder where this hero worship came from. He appointed himself general. He president. He anointed himself king of the world.
King of the world.
Oh,
King
yeah.
of the world. I mean, you can think over and over. He was the mayor of Nauvoo. He was the head of the trash department of Nauvoo. He was a head of, I mean, you name it in Nauvoo, he was it. He
Like
was
the
the
mayor.
president of the
Wasn't he the
church.
mayor?
He was the
Yeah.
mayor. He was
Yes.
the president of the church.
Yes.
He was the president of the high priesthood. He was there's not a title
He ran
wasn't
for
given.
president.
He ran for president.
Yes.
Yeah.
He ran for
Yep.
president. There's not a title that he didn't bestow upon himself other than president of the United States, which no one was willing to bestow upon him. But he did bestow every other title upon himself. So yes, is there hero worship of Joseph Smith? We sang songs, praise to the man who communed with Jehovah. We were taught that this man walked with God. And I can't remember if it's Joseph Smith himself or it was written about him right after his death. Joseph Smith did more
Yes.
for mankind, save Jesus Christ than any other man on earth.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
That's pretty much hero worship from the leaders of the church, put out by the church.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you got
and-
no one to blame but the leaders of the church.
That's
They
right.
don't produce photo images like this that Rebecca's showing.
Yeah.
They're all very glowing. The paintings,
Exactly.
everything,
Ken
the
doll. The
actors,
Ken doll. Yep.
yeah, portray them very handsome men. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
Yeah.
Blue eyes. And that's why I think they were so upset by the daguerreotype that came out and why they won't claim it, because they're like, oh, he's just a guy. And when you start
Yeah.
looking at him as just a guy, you start going, wait a minute. If he's just a guy, if he's not that glowing Ken doll, then he's a guy that was with teenage girls. Oh, he's just a guy. You know, it really
Yeah.
makes you to be able to imagine it. And that he's just, a person, and maybe a lot of these things are a little more accurate than we like to think. So I think that's why they kind of distance themselves from that for sure. Gosh, what point was I going to make about running for president? It was something like that.
I don't know, but that one is pretty good.
We already talked about that anyway. It'll come to me, but yeah, just this idea. And again, they keep saying he's not perfect. We're not talking about perfect. We're talking about just being a decent human being. Most of these things that we know, he was not even a decent human being, and that's just sad when you think of how many people revered him and held themselves up against him, even his own apostles, many of which were good people, and trying to do the right thing. And, we're caught in that system. People who lived and died in the church, like I said, revere him. He was not even the caliber of just an average person, I would say. So.
Yeah, anyone who opposed him was excommunicated.
Right.
Immediately. And when people say he's not perfect, okay, tell me what about him wasn't perfect that you're saying he's not perfect?
Yeah.
Name a few things that you think are not perfect about this man. When you start naming the things he did, those are not things we just say someone isn't perfect when they do those things.
Right. Well, what I find, and I might have a slide about this, I can't remember, is that they often say he made mistakes, right?
Yes.
Like it's a mistake. All of us make mistakes. And they say, of course, all of us make mistakes. But what he was doing was not a mistake. It was a choice and a lifestyle and a systematic behavior. It's kind of like the church today about the SEC and creating those clone companies for 20 years to hide how much money they had. That's not a mistake. That's a choice and a lifestyle that you've made for 2 decades to conceal this money. And I think that's, again, as I read through these kinds of posts and comments, they just seem to feel like the problems with Joseph Smith are a mistake. He just made a mistake. He accidentally took something he shouldn't have from the store, or he said an unkind word. Mistakes. That's not what we're talking about. This is systematic, planned, contrived, scheming. It's not just a simple mistake, which of course anyone would forgive. We all make mistakes and we're not perfect. So, but again, blame the hero worship. So, okay, let's move on to number 7. There's so much to say about every single one. Okay. Ooh, here we go. I'll read this one. Give Joseph a break. Here it is. We all make mistakes and have flaws. Okay, look, I already talked about this. So one thing to keep in mind, at the end of the day, Joseph Smith is just a guy. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't angelic. He wasn't Jesus. Well, okay.
He was next to Jesus. Remember, that's what they said.
And that's what reminded me what I was going to say about the last slide is we all know that at the judgment bar, it will be God, Jesus, and Joseph Smith sitting there at the judgment bar at the end of your life. You have to account yourself to Joseph Smith. And I'm glad it's like that, because if I believed in the afterlife, I've already planned it out. I get up to the judgment bar and I look at God and Jesus. I go, really? Seriously, this guy? Seriously, what could I tell you now that I did? That come on. You know?
What have I done?
So he's my get out of jail free card. I'm just like, please.
I heard one woman in the temple. I just thought of something. She told me that at the judgment bar, it will be the prophet that was the prophet when you died.
Yes.
Oh.
And
is that true too? And Joseph Smith and God and Jesus?
I don't think so. I don't think Joseph Smith. I think God, Jesus, and then whoever the prophet of your particular death.
Oh.
And I kind of did the math in my head when she told me that. And
you're like, Bednar?
No. Bednar, that's exactly what I thought. I was like,
yeah,
that's so funny. I hadn't heard that. I'd heard it was Joseph Smith, but that's a really funny idea. That's really interesting.
She was arguing and she said it was such authority to me. And she said, no, it will be the prophet when you die.
But wait, what if he's not dead yet?
No, but it's the one whoever is the prophet when you die.
Right, but what if he's not dead? Aren't you judged?
He can't judge you yet. You got to wait.
He can't judge you yet. You have to wait till he dies.
Oh, had you heard that Joseph Smith was going to be there, Landon? I can't remember.
Yes,
where I heard that. Maybe
I did not hear what that lady said. I've always been taught it was the head of your dispensation, and Joseph Smith is the head of our.
Okay, she interpreted it to the head of your dispensation.
Yeah, I like that idea though. I would hold out for Uchtdorf. I think that would be good. He'd probably be really nice.
That's when you should kick it, Rebecca.
You had it right.
But I don't think that's a good idea. He's sounding old.
Wow. I know. Okay. Anyway, interesting idea. All right, here we go. He has just as many flaws as the rest of us, and he was called to be a prophet at a very young age. Yeah, give him a break. Think how stupid you were and how many bad decisions you made. Sure. He had all the normal problems that humans do, plus the weight of the whole church on his back. It would be more suspicious if he was 100% perfect. That being said, he did some amazing things and was a great tool in God's hands. But God didn't force him to be perfect or anything. The real question is, are the things he taught and the church he established true? Again, removing Joseph and his character from the Book of Mormon and the church. Let's see. Is the Book of Mormon the word of God? If so, it doesn't really matter what mistakes Joseph personally made. He established the true church. One quote there. The next one says, I think it's a matter of perspective. It's easy to see the flaws in people from our own time. Joseph Smith was a prophet. He was a flawed man. He was uneducated. He made some poor choices. Yeah, that's it. And we know he made some uninspired decisions, the 116 pages, for example. Rather than dwelling on these imperfections, which we know he had, I dwell on the fact that he did see God. The Book of Mormon is true. Jesus Christ really does lead this church, and God often chooses imperfect people to do his work because that's all he has. You know, I could make a list of people living at the time of Joseph Smith, some pretty spectacular moral people who did some pretty spectacular moral things. And the ones we know of, right, are the ones that were in leadership or famous. Think about all just the common people that I guarantee you, so many of them had more moral character than Joseph Smith himself. And yet God chose to work with him. So again, this also just says, give him a break. He made mistakes, and we're separating everything in our testimony from who he really was. Landon, what do you think?
Well, he was young when he was called to be a prophet. Well, we don't even know what age, because, you know, he didn't write anything about it until the 1830s, at which time he was
Exactly.
almost 30 years old. But to say that he was, you know, that he was called as a young man, okay, well, we were taught that he had angels instructing him and watching over him. You think that the Holy Ghost and the angels and God might step in and say, really bad look, Joe. You may
Get out of
not,
that barn.
yeah, stay out of that barn. You may not want to be wrestling with a 15-year-old girl.
Not going to end well.
An 18-year-old girl. You may not want to be claiming that you're marrying him. But see, here's the thing. What are the mistakes he made? Are we saying that marrying two sisters was a mistake? Well, no,
He was
God
told to do
commanded
it.
it, evidently. He was commanded, so he was
Yes.
righteous. He didn't make a mistake.
Yep.
Every single thing that we say that you say that was wrong of him to do, the church, oh, God commanded it. God commanded it. So he is perfect, because everything he did, he seemed to do at God's command.
Right.
And we get an excuse for it. So he was perfect according to the church in these things. Did he make mistakes? Did he stub his toe? Did he swear? Sure he did. This is not what we're talking about.
Right.
This is not what you give a break for. You do not go to a known con man and say, I'm going to give him a break because he might be a good person. He's a grandfather, so I've got to give him a break because he's a grandpa, even though he's a known con man. You're going to be cautious. You're going to be wary. You're going to step lightly and try to figure out how he's conning you. And that's the way we should be looking at Joseph.
Yep. Had you heard that before, Jessica? Mistakes, give him a break, that kind of stuff. I heard that a lot.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. She's just like, I'm done with this. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But again, just that whole idea of mistake. And then they always put it back on you. Haven't you made mistakes?
No, I really
many
haven't
times
made the
that.
ones.
Yeah,
that
not
just-
like that. Not like
No.
that. I haven't. You know, that's the thing. I love pretty much everyone can say that. All right. Oh, here's a good one. Number 8. Joseph Smith accomplished so much that the rest of it doesn't matter at all. Jessica's turn to read.
Okay. The thing is, Joseph brought forth the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, pearl of great price, restored the priesthood and church organization to the world, reformed the quorum of the 12 apostles, and basically brought the fullness of the gospel of Christ out of the depths of apostasy. This is a huge, huge work. When it is said that Joseph did more for the work of salvation of mankind than anyone aside from Jesus, there's truth in that. With a roaring testimony of the importance of the restoration and all of these blessings, even the most extreme of controversies around him become pitiful in comparison. We take the restoration for granted, in my opinion. For me, the church and the book of, okay, this is a new quote.
Right.
For me, the church and the Book of Mormon have been life-changing. I can't believe that something so good could originate from someone who wasn't inspired by God.
There
Matthew
you go, in a
7,
nutshell.
16.
Yeah. What do you think of that?
I think they're in deep.
Jessica's getting weak. I told you after I sent her the slideshow, she's like, I don't know. We'll make it 8 slides and then we'll just have to go get a drink or something, right?
I know, I should have brought wine with me. I mean, this is, ooh.
I know, but
It's
again,
just sad. I mean, it's
like
all stuff we've covered.
Yeah, it is. And and that's fine. As we go through, we're going to start, repeating ourselves, so we won't, but it's a self-defense mechanism that your brain has. You cannot fathom that it might not be real. It's your whole lifestyle. Everything is pinned on it. So you can't fathom that there's a problem with him. So you kind of gaslight yourself into thinking it's okay. Any brief thoughts, Landon?
Well, we just read that. We just talked about that very statement.
Did.
Oh, we're not worshiping and then they just say he did it more for mankind than anyone but Jesus. It's and if you look at the accomplishments there, Book of Mormon, demonstrably false, non-historical, Doctrine and Covenants. So many problems in the Doctrine and Covenants, polygamy, and other revelations that have had to be altered and denied, such as Oliver Cowdery using a divining rod to interpret things. Pearl of Great Price, demonstrably false. Joseph Smith translation, demonstrably restored the priesthood. No historical written late, years after the case.
Backdated.
Reform the quorum of the 12 apostles. Okay, he called 12 buddies and called them apostles. Okay, I'll give him that. And brought the fullness of the gospel of Christ. A gospel that kept changing. Started out with a Trinitarian view and morphed into the first vision of which also was very late and has multiple
Backdated.
stories that change from one person being seen to multiple persons being seen. So you've got problems all over the place in these accomplishments that you're listing. One, I can give you, okay, maybe something's misunderstood here. When all of them show up this way, that's a huge red flag.
Well, and the church itself has dialed things back in this list because it says brought the gospel out of the depths of apostasy. We're now learning there was no great apostasy. I mean, that's kind of a narrative that they're starting to introduce. So everything is changing. All these examples are morphing right in front of our eyes. But again, the common membership doesn't get that memo at all. I mean, I think about my parents who just passed away in the last couple of months, both of them, and they lived a very different church. They did not get any memos about anything that had changed. They and I always made the joke, and I've said this before, if they were to have walked into a normal sacrament meeting because they were in assisted living for the last couple of years and started just saying their normal Mormon stuff, they would have been hauled into the bishop's office for apostasy because they're spouting the doctrine of the McConkie, the Packer, that's all gone.
Those were the good old days. Yeah.
Yep, it's the good old days. That's right. All right, let's forge ahead. Here we go. I think this one's landed. Oh, this was a good one. He was under so much pressure. You can't judge him for the things that he did because of the
he
pressure.
needed all those women just because. It was just so tough.
When I converted, I had the same issues. From all secular perspectives, it appears as if Joseph Smith was a con artist, trying to manipulate people so he could be a king of his own country. Yeah. Boy, they went there and admitted it.
A lot of them do this. They say it and then they dial it back. Their brain says it, but then it won't let them go there. It's very interesting.
But then I read his history in The Pearl of Great Price, and reading what he experienced from his own perspective, it changed my outlook completely. I tried to fathom the weight of having a God-given mission on your shoulders to restore the priesthood, and suddenly having thousands looking to you for guidance. Leadership constantly arguing with each other, behaving badly in your name. I cannot imagine the pressures that would put on a man's shoulders. If he had a failing, it was that he couldn't save or convince more people of the truth, and that drove him to desperate acts. Joseph was definitely a prophet. Wow. You know what else leads to a lot of pressure? Lying to a lot of people and being worried that you're going to be caught in those lies.
Exactly.
That drives a lot of pressure.
It does. Join my bank. It'll be fine. I promise. I've got the money here. See this chest of gold? Oh, wait, no, it's just straw on the bottom with a false top and some gold on top, as we learned from Catherine Melanakis' book, right? Yeah, when he tried to show people, look, I have the gold to back up the bank to support. Yeah, exactly. He dug himself into all these corners.
Give me your daughter. She'll be safe while you go on a mission that I'm calling you on.
Yep. No, there are so many examples. Yep.
And Harold Bloom, didn't he list, because he listed all the great geniuses,
Yeah.
Joseph Smith was on his list.
Oh, he is a genius. I completely concur.
Genius.
Yep. A diabolical genius. Yeah. In fact, on the other side of Mormonism, with all the study and everything, I'm more impressed with him now, not for the same reasons, but yes.
Far more impressed with him now.
Exactly. Yeah. When you really realize what he got away with and what he pulled, you almost can't fathom it. It's
I think he would absolutely love knowing the 300 billion in the bank.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, this is what I think. And I even said this to somebody the other day. If he came back and he saw a conference, he'd go, "What is happening? Who are these old guys? Like when we started it, we were in our 20s, man. We were doing crazy stuff. We were up to all this stuff. We had girls, we had stuff. We were making things up. We were dynamic. We were translating. Who are all these old people?" And they go, "It's fine. We're elderly, but we've got $300 billion." And he'd go, "Say what? Say what?" And he'd love that part of it. Absolutely. He'd love it. And then he'd go, "Where are the plural wives?" "Oh, we did away with that." And he'll go, "We're going to have to talk about that." So I have this whole...
Don't worry, 300 billion, I'll get more.
Yeah, I'll get more. Yep. No, the idea that he wouldn't recognize it at all if he came back, but he'd be very happy, I think, with the money. Yep, he absolutely would. And he'd be able to see that for a century, almost 2 centuries, what he started had continued to manipulate people. And that's why the money was what it was. So,
yeah.
All right. Number 10, we are booking through these. We're doing good. Because like you said, we're kind of repeating some concepts. So we don't need to dig into each because we already have. Ask the Holy Ghost and it will be fine. Okay. We've covered this topic. Somebody said, seek a witness of Joseph Smith's prophetic role from the Holy Ghost through sincere prayer. Once you receive that, none of the controversies matter because you will have received the truth from God. Doesn't mean you'll have the facts. Of course, you won't have any facts or any kind of full understanding or even be able to answer every question. But you'll know he was God's prophet, called to restore Christ's church. And really, this is the argument that no one can argue against. Just pray, know he's a prophet. You don't need facts. You don't need to defend it. You don't need to understand the controversies. You don't need anything. You just have your feelings. You have the Holy Ghost. And that really is what they hang their hat on.
Yeah.
Actually, you can argue against it because as I was reading Rough Stone Rolling, it came to me clearly that this was all bullshit and made up.
That was not the Holy Ghost.
Who's to say? I could say that's the Holy Ghost telling me that. So the Holy Ghost told me it isn't right. And this person who asked this question is saying, I like the church. I like the people. I like going. I like the camaraderie, but something's wrong with me. Well, that's the Holy Ghost telling you something's wrong. If you want to say that. So the Holy Ghost is telling you something's wrong and it's not fine. So listen to that voice that's telling you something's wrong because it is.
No, you have to override that until you get the correct answer. And they're saying that more and more, that the Lord will never give you any kind of personal revelation that disagrees with what you're hearing from the pulpit. But I once had somebody say that everybody cries during testimony meeting, right? Why do people cry so much? You know, and somebody said, that's your inner voice. That's your inner cognition screaming at you, you know, this is not right. There's something wrong here, you know, but you can't fathom that. So it kind of manifests itself in tears. I always thought that was interesting because people do get really upset right away as soon as they get up to their testimony. So, but again, feelings and the Holy Ghost. I also had a friend once on his mission that prayed for a testimony that the Book of Mormon was false, and he got it. He said, I did. I prayed. I kneeled down. I went through all the steps. I need to know. I think the Book of Mormon is false. I'm using Moroni's promise the backwards way. And he came up from that prayer going, I know it's not real. So,
well, the Holy Ghost tells a lot of people a lot of different things. And so that's not a very reliable source when everyone's claiming the Holy Ghost told them something and it's all different.
True. But if you want it to be real, you can get the Holy Ghost to say anything to you. You know what I mean?
If you want it bad enough,
temporarily.
Plead and plead and plead. Eventually something in you will say, what do you have to lose? Go for it.
Yeah. What the hell? What the heck? It's kind of like going to the temple and praying for something important. Like, should I marry this person or should I serve a mission or what should I do? And you eventually just go, I'm talking to myself, whatever, it's fine. I'll do it. You know, and then you tell yourself it was something divine.
Got to make it.
All right. Here we go. Jessica's turn. Again, good one. We've kind of covered this. The problem is we're claiming Joseph was fallible. This is kind of backwards. These people are kind of saying, we are admitting to everybody that there are problems. We shouldn't do that at all. So this is the opposite of, you know, the hero worship thing. So why don't you read this one, Jessica? This is interesting.
My opinion is that we've gone too far admitting Joseph was fallible. There has been so much talk about his faults that we don't speak nearly as much anymore about what a great man he was. It's like anything positive is just dismissed as ignorance. He was an incredible man, teacher, and leader. Our history as a church is incredible and full of amazing stories. I don't think it's a Joseph Smith problem. I think it's a problem of what narrative is most popular in mainstream conversation.
So it's kind of like they're saying everybody's too hard on none of those things are real. That's an interesting argument.
Well,
we need to stand up for.
He is reading the correlated material. So yeah, if you are only reading that, then
Yep, that's true.
It's pretty spectacular.
I agree. The history of the church is full of incredible and amazing stories, but it's amazing that they got away with so many things and that nobody knows about them until the internet came out. To say, I think the problem is what narrative is most popular in mainstream conversation. No, the church is the one who's spinning a narrative that keeps changing. So the problem is the church's changing narrative where they say one thing and then they have to change it because what they've told you about him is not accurate.
Yeah. And a perfect example of this kind of way of thinking is people who deny that Joseph practiced polygamy. Right? Which it is a growing number of people within the church, like attending mainstream Mormonism, but holding that view that you guys have been too hard on Joseph. It's not true. We've read all the sources. He did not practice polygamy. He was not the monster that even the church is sort of starting to say this and this and this. And it's an attractive proposition because you can deconstruct to a certain point. But then if you say that Joseph was blameless, you don't have to lose the golden plates, the restoration story, the visitations, all those things that make Mormonism Mormonism. And so that's why they kind of stop right there, where the rest of us keep deconstruct all of it. It's funny to see the mainstream church and post-Mormons on the same side saying, oh no, he practiced polygamy, right? But a lot of them say you guys are being way too hard on him. He did not. And we have a testimony of the church. It's interesting because the way, as I understand it, they're able to still remain kind of in the church and be there is they believe all the other leaders are kind of fallen, but they're not to be looked at as prophets, but presidents. They're sort of administrating. And so they have keys, but they're administrators. So it's interesting wiggling around with these ideas. But the idea is that you have to keep Joseph pristine and blameless.
Well, for him to be what he is, him to have done what he claims to have done, that makes sense.
Yep, it does. No, and I can see, and we've interviewed people that deny that there's polygamy, and we've talked to a lot of them, and that's it. They're just like us. They had similar experiences. They just deconstructed to a point, and then they use certain tactics and techniques to keep Joseph blameless again. Right? We need a hat. All right, let's flip it, Landon. Boy, we're making really great time now. Okay. Oh, here's a good one. This one's for you, Landon. Again, don't even focus on polygamy. No need to even go there. That's not even anything, doesn't even factor into the equation whatsoever.
I guess the one thing people get tripped up on is polygamy. It's a shame because it's the topic on which we have the least amount of historical data.
Yeah, no.
It was a new practice that began in secret, and Joseph was murdered before the practice was widely institutionalized, even though he's the one who received the revelation to begin it.
Right.
Because of that lack of data, Joseph's polygamy is kind of a
Rorschach test. That means you look at something and tell people what you see, and it's very, objective to the observer.
Where you fill in the holes, don't say that with polygamy, with your preconceived bias. If you believe Joseph was a fraud, you see a theocratic despot with a taste for other men's wives. You can fill in those details. If you believe Joseph was a prophet, you see an imperfect person trying to fulfill a divine command that he may not have fully understood and was uncomfortable with.
I'm so tired of that. Oh my gosh.
He only married 37 people, so he was not very. He
I don't know how to do this.
He didn't know how to deal with it.
This barn thing, it's weird to me. I'm really uncomfortable.
So the church has some essays on this topic, but many of those marriages, the vast majority, were for eternity only. Joseph struggled with the idea of introducing plural marriage and was really reluctant to start it. He did many of the marriages in name only to be obedient to the doctrine. Joseph was to restore the truth from all previous dispensations. Plural marriage is one of those truths. It's something that God implements, sometimes for a specific reason, for a specific purpose.
A temporary commandment.
Abraham and Israel followed this pattern. Now we can speculate reasons for it. The church was young. Building it up again would be easiest through families, and families are more easily made larger with plural marriage.
No, even the church has debunked that.
Yeah, why didn't Joseph have any children if that was the purpose of it? 37 wives.
Yeah.
That's right. And actually, technically, the way to get a very strong base would be to have women have children from multiple different men. That's how you get your genetic base. Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Also, due to the suffering of the saints at the time and the suffering to come, many women needed material protection that was not provided to them at all in these type of marriages.
They were destitute.
The husband would be obligated to provide. It was easier to share resources and support women with many adults in a household, especially because the men...
I think I ran off the page. They were just saying that the men often had to go on missions. Yeah, because they were sent there.
So that Joseph could marry their wives.
Exactly. So
and none of this mentions the fact that Joseph married women who were already married.
Yes. That's a smoking
gun.
To
apostles.
There's no explanation.
Members.
Yep.
That doesn't explain any of this. So your reasoning completely goes out. Of course, polygamy, Joseph Smith is becoming what polygamy has already become. Something that we want to push out, forget about, deny, and just say, Forget about that. It doesn't matter. Forget about it. This is what's important.
Yep, I agree, which is why they say, do we have a Joseph Smith problem? And everybody's trying really hard here to say, no, it's fine. But the underlying current in all of these, you can just kind of hear it. Maybe we do. I think they're trying to say.
I think it's tell me we have a Joseph Smith problem by telling me we don't have a Joseph Smith problem.
That's it. That's exactly it. Oh my gosh. All right, let's move on to our next one. Yeah, polygamy is a big one. All right, let's see. I think it's my turn. Number 12, if the Book of Mormon is true, then Joseph is a prophet. And we saw that before, that reason. And it kind of boggles the mind, but I do understand the thinking behind it. The easiest thing to look at is the Book of Mormon. If the book has the origins he claims, then he's a prophet. If it doesn't, then he's not. So what are you trying to say? They're assuming that everyone agrees the book has the origins, that they're using it as a proof when it's not. It's an open question. As much as, is Joseph a prophet? So you can't use that kind of logical. My testimony is anchored in the Book of Mormon, says this person. I can say with certainty that it is the word of God because of my experiences with the Spirit, not to mention literary and historical proofs. Okay. If that is true, then Joseph Smith is a prophet chosen by God to bring it forth, period. All my concerns are directed back to that. So again, in fact, I think we might have already read this one. Boy, I'm doubling up. But just the idea, and we probably don't need to discuss this because we already have, that if you already know the Book of Mormon through the Spirit, the Book of Mormon proves that the person who created it is truly a prophet. And you really can't argue with that logic. I mean, if that's your logic, if it's rooted in feeling, that's it.
Actually, you can argue with that.
Oh, here comes Landon.
That up again because none of the truths that we claim Joseph Smith restored are in the Book of Mormon. So
that's
Joseph
true.
had to change the Book of Mormon to make Mormondom, because none of the celestial marriage,
it's the Doctrine and Covenants.
It's all in the Doctrine and Covenants. It's not in the Book of Mormon. We had to have the D&C to bring up these ideas, not the Book of Mormon.
Such a good point. Yeah, there's so much missing that people don't really realize unless you say, what's in the Book of Mormon? They're like, well, celestial. No, that's not there. What about that? No.
3 degrees of glory. Nope, not there.
Nope.
Three. The Godhead is 3 separate and distinct beings. Nope. The Book of Mormon actually says the opposite.
Well, the Book of Mormon is not works-based either. I mean, look at Alma the Younger. He was forgiven instantly.
Yeah.
And D&C, the way the church runs, it's works-based.
Yeah. It is. It's very interesting because it's a product of its day and the sermons that were given at the time and the rhetoric that was just in the air. So, all right, look, we're making such good time. I'm so proud of us. Okay. This one Jessica gets to read. Okay. He was persecuted. Therefore he was a prophet. These just get weirder.
X equals Y. Yes,
exactly. Okay. That's it.
My testimony was strengthened in how great a person Joseph Smith was when I reread the account where he was tarred and feathered, and his 2 adopted babies died as a result. As a father now, I think I would have been done after that. When what I'm teaching leads to the death of my own children, that would be a very hard thing to keep going on. But he does, and his family is continually harassed. He personally suffered so much, but kept on going. I think a lot of us would have stopped at some point and thought that it's someone else's turn to take on this burden. Okay, can I just make a comment? He should have stopped, but he didn't. He was tarred and feathered because he was he was trying to get young girls. Yeah. Trying to sleep with young girls. And I'm not saying they should tar and feather him.
No.
But
he brought it on himself, I think is what you're trying to say. Yeah.
It was his behavior that brought it on himself. And he did endanger his family. Yep. He did endanger a lot of people by his actions.
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting because I often think if he were not martyred, if that hadn't happened, right? Sealed the blood of the restoration, he would have gone on. He would have done the same stuff he was doing. Pretty soon, everybody would have been disenchanted. He would have been exposed with the Kinderhook plates, I think, pretty quickly. And it would be a done deal. But instead he died. We wouldn't
be where we are today.
Yeah, we would not be. Exactly. He died. He became a martyr. He became a hero. And he had the champion Brigham Young, and Brigham Young really took it and ran with it, literally. But yeah, everything that happened, he absolutely brought on himself and unfortunately brought on other people. As you just said, Jessica, his family, his followers, everybody. Yeah, it's just tragic when you really start looking what happened to these people. What do you think, Landon? Any quick thoughts on that one? He was persecuted. Therefore, he is a prophet.
This is absolutely ridiculous. In this thinking, millions of Jews who were killed under Hitler are prophets.
Oh,
And as
Yeah.
fathers, what Jew who had their child hauled off wouldn't claim, I'm not a Jew anymore, I don't want to be Jew, and get their children out of that?
yeah.
But no, they continued to believe because that was their belief. Just because you continue to believe and you're persecuted for your belief, that does not make you a prophet.
Yeah.
Every black person tarred and feathered by the Ku Klux Klan is a
Oh,
prophet. I
yeah.
mean, I can name real people who were persecuted simply for who they were, not what they did.
Yeah.
And I can show you thousands of cases of that. That does not make them a prophet. That this is just bunk.
Well, look at the saints. All of the Catholic saints were persecuted in horrible ways,
Oh,
yet the church does not acknowledge them at all. They are not, they're not part of it. They were not, they were not the religious
yeah.
figures that we're supposed to be following. So
Exactly.
strange logic, but again, you got to find whatever you can find. Okay. I think it's Landon's turn. We are getting so close to the end. Oh, here's a good one that we already touched on.
Yeah.
Consider the context. We live in a different day. And here's a picture of the sort of modern looking, strange looking Joseph Smith. What does this say, Landon?
Many things we might judge harshly today were common in the 1800s. This was more or less the Wild West era, and you can't judge that time by 21st century standards. It's
Right.
also important to know Joseph was very much a product of the time he lived in.
Mhm.
He had some ideas or concepts that today we consider silly or even weird. They always say this, but they never tell you what those are. So I don't
Yeah.
know how you
Magic,
argue
the
against
magic.
that.
The magic.
Yeah, the magic worldview is probably one, but they're alluding to, but they don't ever say it.
Yeah.
There is a historical concept called relativism. History professors debate this concept a lot, but it is the notion that one should judge cultural or historical periods, leaders within the context of their culture or time period. It's the opposite of presentism. Joseph Smith, in my opinion, should be judged within a relativism context. While he still does not look perfect, and even with that standard has misgivings, it helps present a better picture of who he is. So they give you this test, and then they say, well, he fails that test too.
He failed it, but still.
but still,
He's a prophet.
you can't judge him. And really, 200 years ago is not that big of a
No.
change. He was an American in the last 200 years. His culture is very close to our culture. Marrying young girls and marrying multiple wives was not in his culture.
Yep.
So why are we
all the problems?
comparing that?
Hence
And
all
instead,
the problems.
yeah, you're saying polygamy is okay because Joseph did it in his time and it was okay 2,000 years ago.
Yep.
So we're going to compare him against the time
No.
2,000 years ago to justify his actions 200 years ago when it wasn't acceptable. You're completely throwing
wasn't.
this whole argument out the door.
Yep.
It wasn't acceptable, and they were lying about it. There's a reason he was being tarred and feathered. I mean, his behavior was not okay for the time. There's a reason he was being arrested. There was a
I know,
reason
and they try to make it seem okay. They try to say everybody married younger girls. Then census data comes out. People have done studies. Nope, the average age was 21. And yes, sometimes, you'd be married younger, but the age difference was also young. A 20-year-old might marry a 19, like that. It's not a 45-year-old marrying a 20-year-old.
No,
you can't say that. You can't. And
it wasn't
you can
that
point
long
to,
ago.
Exactly. And you can point to so many other people of that day who, again, were moral, wonderful people, doing incredible things. And that was not him. There was a reason that every society, it's funny, we're doing an episode on the members of the mob, right? The mob, which the church likes to paint as these ruffians. In all the church films, they talk like this, and they got a cigar, and they got a whiskey bottle. If you really study who these people were that were trying to just rid their town of this influence, they were the upstanding citizens of the town. And to their dying day said, I stand by what I did. I had to protect my family, my friends, my community. And this is why I did what I did, because it was a bad element that was in town.
No, and they were voting as a block. They were doing, I mean, it was bad.
Yeah, it was bad. Any of us would have done that. And I came to that realization probably like 15 years ago. I was in my cul-de-sac and there's like 25 little kids in it. We got all our families. We're all hanging out. It's a wholesome Utah neighborhood, whatever. And I thought, what would happen if Mormons from the 1800s moved in, started looking at the girls that were, the 13-year-old teenagers, started taking over our city council, starting, just went down the list. And I thought, well, we would be the mob. We would say, you got to get out of here. We would do what we have to do, and we see that in temple building, where you see these towns, they're not using violence and rhetoric, and it's not against Mormons. It's against an influence that's coming in and manipulating city government, using underhanded tactics. So they're fighting back through the legal system. It's no different to me. It's still happening today.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. You have to, if you're going to judge Joseph Smith by those standards in a Wild West era, you have to also judge the mob by those same standards. This was frontier justice. There wasn't a law. When people came in and conned you, you tarred and feathered them. When people came in and took your daughters and married them, and took your wives and married them, you got even through frontier justice. That's why there were mobs. So if you want to judge Joseph by those standards, we also have to judge the mob. And the mob was simply enforcing the standards of their day that Joseph was completely breaking.
Yeah, he was breaking the social contract. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep. That's a perfect way to say it. That's exactly what was happening. Place after place after place. That's the thing. Were there any other religions that started at that time? Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, spiritualism, any of those religions being driven from town to town to town? No, because they might have different codes and different beliefs, but they weren't breaking the societal code to the extreme like the Mormons were. So. Yeah. I know that's a simplistic way to say it, but you guys understand what I'm saying. Okay. First-hand accounts of how awesome Joseph was. Okay, here's a good one as we're almost finished here. Many who knew Joseph Smith personally spoke highly of his character, his kindness, and his integrity. While no one is perfect, again, these first-hand accounts offer a more balanced perspective compared to the often one-sided criticism. Now, I'm not sure how you decide who's saying what and which source is trustworthy, because a lot of the major criticisms came from his inner circle and apostles who were all excommunicated right and left, right? You get excommunicated, you get excommunicated, and you get excommunicated. All right, last quote. When I read stories from my ancestors that lived and interacted with Joseph, they regarded him very highly.
Yeah, so did mine.
Yeah,
so did
personal anecdote. Do you actually have stories in your family history about Joseph
Smith?
I do. Oh,
so
wow.
My great grandfather was a childhood friend of Joseph Smith, Jacob.
Oh my gosh.
And they were born, he and Joseph were born the same year. My ancestor was born in July, Joseph was born in December. Anyway, the Smith family moved around a bit, but they stayed in New England. Anyway, when the missionaries went out, once the church was restored, went out in New England, went to the house of my ancestor and told about the church, and he's standing on the doorstep. This is the story that the family loves to share. I don't know what journal account it's in, but he stood at the doorstep and said, well, Joseph Smith, he founded a church, and he said, Joe Smith, and then he yelled out to his wife, we're joining. And so they all loved that story because they said, oh, he knew he was a prophet. I remember hearing this like 20 years ago when I first heard it. And I thought, no, he's really charming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, he had charisma. That's the thing. When you talk about being a genius, some people just have it. We all know people like that. They just have it. Even if they're up to something or they get away with stuff, they just have it. And I believe Joseph Smith, As on Seinfeld, they called it the Kavorka, right? If you're familiar with Kramer, you just have it. And he did, and he used it, and he knew how to use it.
He did. And my ancestor, I don't know when, I can't remember the dates of when he married his second wife, but he had 7 wives total.
Oh, wow.
I come from the second.
Wow, what a prolific ancestor.
Yes. He had 7 total, but I don't know what, I need to look that up and see what year it was, if it was in Joseph Smith's life or after, I don't know, but he did migrate to Salt Lake. And
wow.
Anyway.
And now, are you sure that when they came to the door and said, you can have 7 wives, he didn't go, I'm joining, right?
Yeah, I know. That's probably the selling point. But yes. Yeah, he joined right on the spot.
Yeah. Well, and most of
At
the
least
accounts
that's the
came.
story.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing story. And most of these accounts, when we were all growing up, came from the church, right? You heard all these incredible stories about Joseph. It's only recently in the last like 10 years, the internet's revealing things that the church has dialed back on that, as we discussed a couple slides ago. I remember making the observation, like I said, I've always been in primary. That's where I kind of felt like, okay, it's all right, I can be here. And they would have ancestor story time every Sunday, where a different child would be assigned to bring an ancestor story, like what you just told. And I started listening to these, and they were very violent for little kids to be sharing. It was all like, my ancestor hid Joseph. They had pitchforks. They were pounding on the door. He was under the bed, and the mom's standing there and holding up a flannel board. And I'm thinking, in no other place in your life would you allow your child probably to tell this horrific story, So a lot of those stories are about protecting the prophet, giving everything you had for the prophet, that kind of thing, just that totally locked into the whole story and to the prophet himself. So I'm not surprised about all these glowing stories. But again, you can hear a lot of stories about people. Does that really make them who they say they are?
Yeah.
There's so many examples.
Well, and this ancestor did later become one of Joseph Smith's bodyguards.
Oh,
so there were journal accounts with that.
Okay. So he really did like lay his life on the line for the prophet. That's amazing.
I guess. I mean, he obviously didn't do that great of a job, but yeah, he was his bodyguard for a little while.
It was rough.
So he did have security, private security.
Yeah.
Yep.
He did have bodyguards.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Danites were his bodyguards as well. So who knew Joseph Smith the best?
Yeah.
When you start looking at who knew him the best, it would have been his counselors and his inner circles, those people who served in the first presidency with him. And he excommunicated every single one of them, with the exception of Sidney Rigdon and Hiram Smith. Yep. I think there's 14 or 15 others that all got excommunicated.
Yeah, I have a chart I just found today. It's incredible. And they were the ones that were accusing him of things, like you're this and this. And
they didn't like what he was doing. And
they were trying to call him out on it. Exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even Emma, his wife, says some horrible things about him and about his character.
Tried to poison him.
Yep.
She
did not trust him. She didn't trust him. So let's look at those who are closest to him, not somebody who just is basking in his aura of
stars
greatness,
in their eyes,
that has no daily interface with him. Or he comes and he just, oh, sister, you will have faith and be healed, and walks away. Let's talk about the people who worked with him every day, if we want to talk about integrity and kindness, because those people say some horrible things about him. Oliver Cowdery called him a bootlegger, a counterfeiter, a liar, a thief.
Filthy affair.
Dirty, filthy affair, an adulterer. He called him all kinds of things. And of course, we just read earlier where if anyone said anything negative, well, then we have to look at their background and attribute that they must be lying because there's something in their background.
Yep. Those who are closest know. I just read today this post about Elder Bednar and his staff is like the highest revolving staff of any of the apostles. Like, people do not stay. And they have tried to bring in like interpersonal relationship coaches to try to correct whatever this toxic culture because each apostle has their staff, right, working for them and that kind of thing. And I just read this today that he has one that just the turnover because nobody can stay. So those that know you closely are the ones that are like, I'm out of here.
That doesn't surprise me.
No,
I can't wait till he's prophet. I think
I can't.
The most entertaining thing ever.
I'm super excited too. It's going to be cool. So, hopefully we're still podcasting then, right? And we're like, it happened. We'll be like 95. It happened. So, all right, we're getting to the very end, everybody. Can you believe there are this many reasons why we do not have a Joseph? People have probably forgotten what we started talking about, right? Because it's been so long. We're trying to determine, do we have a Joseph Smith problem? Okay, so we'll have Jessica read this one. And again, it's that idea, whatever, forget Joseph. If it's working, just do it. It's fine. That's what you kind of arrive at after you've gone through all these logical, and you realize it's not so logical. You kind of arrive at this.
Yeah, I think the church is arriving to this.
Yep, I think so too.
I lost my testimony of the church's truth claims largely because of my issues with Joseph Smith and other early leaders of the church. However, I stayed active for years because I really loved the community within the church in my area. I eventually left because I disagreed with modern church policies doctrine. I say all of that because I think it's valid to join, convert, stay if the church works for you. Even if you don't have a complete testimony, do what makes you happy. There's no way to ever completely and fully know if the Mormon church or any other church is the one true church.
So that's a very realistic point of view. What do you think, Jessica?
I think that's the healthiest approach,
Yep.
but at the same time, I mean, I'm surprised someone that stayed active for years but didn't, really believe is saying to someone, yeah, go ahead and do it. The problem with the church is it's not something you can kind of do halfway, and you can't do it under your own terms. It's under their terms.
Yep.
So
and you can't know that as a convert. Or as somebody who's investigating. You have no idea. And the missionary program is so, hey, hi, my name's Elder so-and-so. Want to get baptized? You have no, it's even worse than ever before, where you're not vetted and you just join and you're in,
Yeah. And so, I mean, you're committing a lot. So I don't agree with that, but it's not a bad approach either. I mean, I could see some
people have reasons to join, reasons to stay, and this person's being realistic. So that's what it is. What do you think, Landon? Landon's going to go, I disagree.
This is the Jersey approach to testimony. Forget about it.
Forget
about it. You don't need that Joseph Smith. You don't need the Book of Mormon. As long as you're happy, forget about it. It doesn't matter if it's true. Just forget about it. What a great approach. That is not the church I grew up in. Don't worry if none of this stuff's true. If you're happy, go with it.
Well, and then forgetting about it, you got to still pay the tithing. Right?
You can't forget about the tithing.
Any of our viewers and listeners from Jersey, we completely apologize for the access that we're trying to do. It's just not working. But you get what we're saying. Yeah. So it kind of just like de-evolves through these reasons to just like, it's okay.
This is a Joseph Smith problem when they're telling you have to forget about him to believe in the church. That's a Joseph Smith problem.
Pay no attention to Joseph Smith behind the screen, right? That's it. Pay no attention. And then number 16. Okay, this has got to be the best one here. And I cannot tell you how many people pointed to this person. There were dozens of comments holding up Don Bradley as a poster child. Now, Don Bradley was a faithful Joseph Smith scholar. He wrote the last 116 pages. Then he stepped away from the church for a number of years, but then he came back. And everybody uses his name all the time as somebody that came back. And he's a wonderful person. We know him and he's awesome. And he just got married. Wonderful woman named Jasmine. It's awesome. But so many people use this as an example. Look, he did it. So it says, however, you are right. There are many people that struggle with this issue. A great example of this is a guy named Don Bradley. He had such an issue with Joseph Smith that he left our church and dedicated his life to studying Joseph Smith so that he could expose him for the fraud he is. Except it didn't stay like that. See, these stories are so inspiring. Like, you got to just pin all your hopes on it. Over the years, he found evidence from Joseph Smith's life that brought him back to the church. I recommend reading his works and watching videos on YouTube where he explains his experiences. There's hardly anyone out there more versed in Joseph Smith than him. So we love Don Bradley. We're not going to say anything about, what we think about that, but a lot of people, look for this anecdotal evidence of, hey, that guy had a problem with him and he's fine. Or the opposite of that is kind of like, or even almost the same. He's so smart. He knows everything about Joseph Smith and he stays. So you kind of just have to outsource it, not have your own opinion, and just trust someone else that you think knows more than you do. And if he knows and he stays, right? Forget about it. It's another way to say that, isn't it? What do you think, Landon?
Well, when Don Bradley left when he knew everything, how come everybody didn't leave? So when Don Bradley comes back, then they all stay. So what happens if Don Bradley leaves again? Do we leave again? And then do we throw this argument out? Because plenty of people have come back and left again. Don Bradley is a Joseph Smith scholar. Yep. It's kind of hard to sell books about Joseph Smith to people who don't believe in Joseph Smith. So you
Yeah.
may find that you kind of have to believe in Joseph Smith, or at least find some redeeming qualities in Joseph Smith if you're a Joseph Smith scholar. Don can say whatever he wants, and Don's a great guy, very humble man. But just because Don said so doesn't mean anything. Look at all the other examples, and the fact that Don, the great scholar on Joseph Smith, had problems with Joseph Smith tells you there's a problem.
That's right. And then he found his way back for whatever reason. There could be a myriad of reasons. We know
Yeah.
it's hard for church historians. D. Michael Quinn comes to mind to, after they've stepped away, find positions, find livelihood on the other side. You almost have to go back to where your bread is buttered. So that might be part of it. I don't know. But again, following someone else, I think, is the point of this. Trusting, another scholar. They've got it figured out. They know. So,
But if
have you
that's
ever
your
run
argument, then you need to trust the millions of other scholars that would say
Oh, no.
everything in the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith is fraudulent
No.
and can be proven. You have to listen. You have to give them at least as much weight.
Can't do that because it doesn't fit your narrative. You have to find
Yeah.
somebody that plugs into your narrative and supports it, and then you follow them. So, what do you think about this last one, Jessica?
Well, I think it's interesting. We all kind of need a person to be the smarter one and follow. I mean, when I was a kid, Hugh Nibley was the name that I heard all the time.
Yeah.
He was faithful. He seemed to know everything. Nobody talks about him anymore, but that was kind of the name. And I'm sure Don's a lovely person. I'm not criticizing him, but that is a common thing. And you see that particularly with the higher up leaders. One thing I remember Jeremy Reynolds stating, though, he said, when you really listen to these guys that are a little smarter, that do know what's going on, and I think he did put Richard Bushman in this category, but he said when they bear their testimony, it's a very country club sort of testimony in that, they don't come out and say, I believe that this church is true. And just they say things like, I appreciate that the gospel makes me a better man. Or I appreciate that, so they kind of, without acknowledging the problems and the facts, and they don't acknowledge that they don't really believe in these certain things. They just, but the gospel, but this is the Lord's church, or, something that's just sort of yada. But here we are, kind of thing. And so it's sort of interesting. And I think this sort of falls under that.
Yeah. That's so interesting because you hear what you want to hear from that, but they're not saying what you're hearing, but they say enough that you internalize that and you hear that. So that's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. And if you really listen, and after I heard that, and I was still I was listening, and I finally read the CES letter after reading all this. And then I heard my stake president bear his testimony, and I could hear it. I could hear that sort of language.
Wow.
And it was like that higher level of, well, I appreciate that this church makes me a better man. It makes me.
Yeah, we're not a witness for Christ. We're a witness for the name of Christ. But everyone's like, no,
it's that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And it's all very subjunctive. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So interesting. That is cool. All right. Well, these were the 16 reasons. And then I just tagged on at the end, like we saw before, where you mentioned Landon. These guys are kind of saying it out loud. So let's see, Jessica's turn. I think we've got 2 of these, and then I think we've done it. We've accomplished it. So this is where people, faithful, social media here, but they actually are kind of saying it a little bit, but then they dial it back.
Okay. On the one hand, perhaps Joseph Smith was a con man. Perhaps he got up over his skis and this thing got way bigger than he was planning, and he was in too deep. Eventually it caught up to him and it killed him. Maybe he was so charismatic that other people spontaneously had religious visions based on the fervor and excitement of it all. It explains the gold digging, it explains the seer stone, it explains polygamy, and it explains the apparent Masonic connections in the temple rites and covenants. It explains the chapters of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon and the many, many uses of "and it came to pass" as filler language. Great, easy peasy. What it doesn't explain is the firsthand accounts of those that saw, felt, and handled the plagues, the recorded miracles and healings. It doesn't explain the many anachronisms in the Book of Mormon that have proven true, the many Hebraisms found in the Book of Mormon, the poetry and wisdom found in the book. It doesn't explain the chiasmus and the other new discoveries that we're still finding out about. The Book of Mormon, how "and it came to pass" has direct Hebrew connections, and how names in the Book of Mormon have Hebrew and Egyptian connections that were unknown to the world at the time of the writing, let alone a farm boy from upstate New York. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, there it is, the farm boy. And again, so the first paragraph, he's right there. And then the second paragraph, this person spent a lot of time on Book of Mormon Central, I think, because pretty much every single thing there has actually been debunked and is not accurate, but they're hanging everything on that. So they can say it, but then they quickly,
well, and
there's an answer.
Such authority too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah. Bear your testimony of it. Yep. No, that's exactly right. But Atlanta's just weak. He's sitting there like this. He can't even comment. He's had it.
I know. There's so much to go in.
I was going to say anyone can cross can cross a minefield if they know where the mines are and avoid them. And that's exactly what they're doing here. They know where the minefields are, and they're picking a path around it because they know where they're at, and they're avoiding those things.
Yeah.
Problem is, the church is full of those mines, and you're eventually going to step on one that you don't know about, and it's going to blow your testimony out of the water because there's so many problems out there, and you're going to hit one. You can't avoid them. Eventually, you're going to hit one. And that's why the church tells you, stay away from this, stay away from that. They're trying to tell you that's a mine that, so don't step on that one because that'll blow up your testimony. Here's another mine. And this guy's just bought into this, Oh, well, if I follow the path that the church pointed out and tells me that these anachronisms and Hebraisms exist and that there's actual archaeology, which there is not, and there's actually Egyptian connections and Hebrew connections, which there are not, you can say that, and you can walk yourself through the minefield because you're avoiding all the minefields. But as soon as you step on one, it's going to blow it all up.
Wow, that is a really great metaphor. I hadn't really thought of before, because you're right. They definitely, it's called redirect of the question, right? They redirect you to a question that they have half an answer to, or isn't such a serious question, to direct you away from where you might step on that mine and get some information that, like you said, blows everything out of the water and you can't reconcile it. So what a great metaphor. We might have to do a whole episode on that, Landon. That was great. All right. I think this is our last one. Yes, cognitive dissonance. And I've included, of course, the colorized picture of the daguerreotype of Joseph Smith, because again, as you look at that, it's just a guy, it's just a person. And it makes a big difference when you look at that. They're never going to include this in any of the books. I mean, it's pretty well proven by a lot of people that this is a picture, but they're never going to do it just because it's just a guy. So go ahead, Landon, on that. Cognitive dissonance.
If by problem you mean challenge, then yes, I think so. What to think about Joseph Smith? And everyone who hears about Joseph and what he allegedly did faces the same challenge. What to think about Joseph Smith? Was he honest or a huckster? Did he really translate the Book of Mormon from ancient writings of ancient prophets, or did he just come up with all of it somehow in some way other than how he said he did it? Did he really restore the true Church of Jesus Christ as guided by Jesus Christ and heavenly angels sent to minister to him, or did he just start another one of hundreds that claim to be the way the church should be? Did he receive revelations from God, or were those delusions of his own mind or outright dishonest ramblings? Did he have any real faith in God, or was he just putting on a big show? Who and what was Joseph Smith? Was he evil or good? And how are we to find out what he really was? Ask God while expecting God to tell us? Why would we or anyone ever do that? Aren't we all intelligent enough to figure everything out for our own selves? I know what I know, and I know that whatever I think, everyone else is free to make their own mind up for their own selves, whether or not they ask God for more wisdom to learn what is true. Yep. My my thoughts on this is, actually, in the church, you are not free to think whatever you want. If you say, no, I don't believe Joseph was a prophet, you will not get a temple recommend. You will not be called to serve in the church. So you are not free, if you live in this community and were raised in this community, to think what you want to think about Joseph Smith. It completely directs your life. And if you choose not to believe in Joseph Smith, be prepared for your life to change greatly, because you will be ostracized, you will be kicked out, you could be excommunicated, you will be thrown out of your community for even questioning whether or not Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. So don't say that you're free to make up your mind when you are not, when you are born and live in this church. You're not free to do that. Yes, you can make up a mind, but there is a price that is going to be paid for it. And those of us that have been willing to pay the price, we didn't do so because we thought we were right. We spent years researching this, and we found out we know what kind of man Joseph Smith was. It's not hard if you look at sources other than what are correlated sources trying to paint the man into a picture that he never was.
Wow, that's like a mic drop moment, isn't it, Jessica?
It is.
It's like boom. So any final thoughts to add to that? I think that's our last slide. I think we have one more just to sit on as we finish up, but
No, I think we've covered it. No, that was great. Thank you.
yeah, no, I think so too. And I feel like, yeah, here we go. Final thoughts and takeaways. I feel like the Joseph Smith papers, I feel like maybe Gail Miller, who donated all the money to bring those forward and allow the research. She might be the one that eventually brings the church down, because those Joseph Smith papers, for people that are looking, like we have people that come on our podcast that are never Mormons, and they go in there and they read footnotes and they just read. They're not really guided the way that somebody in the church would be researching, and they're pulling out really interesting stuff. I don't know how many of you saw our episode with Lee Cranenbuhl on Miss Six Asterix about, a love child, a polygamous affair, Joseph, Emma. I mean, it's all in there in the Joseph Smith papers, lots of it in the footnotes. So I feel as time goes forward, the next, 5 years, whatever, and people are saying that AI is going to help us catch up as information is put out, into just the world, and AI grabs it and is able to make correlations that a lot of us can't. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes forward. And I think that the Joseph Smith papers are going to be a huge part of it. So I'm a huge fan. I love them. It's shocking to me that things are just written. There they are, there it is. Like our Reverend friend said, you guys have a purely written history that's brand new, and there it is. And there's no way around that. You can correlate as much as you want, but it's written and it's in the Joseph Smith papers. So who knows what they're holding back? I mean, William Clinton diaries, all that, but if they really will release everything, the truth is out there, right? And it will set you free. There we go. All right. Any final thoughts? Have we covered it? Is there a Joseph Smith problem? It seems to be really relative, doesn't it?
I
yes, there is.
Yes, there is. Jessica votes yes. Yes.
Yeah. I couldn't help but notice that even these faithful people trying to apologize, whatever they're trying to do here, they're trying apologetics. I don't think there was one of these where they didn't say, yes, he's got problems. Yes, he's a flawed person. Yeah. That would have never been said in our generation when we were kids. That never would have been considered. Yep. So the fact that people today are saying, yes, he had a problematic life, shows that they have a Joseph Smith problem, that people are figuring out what kind of man he really was, and that the narrative they spun is simply not true, and that this man is not what he proclaims to be. So yes, they clearly have a Joseph Smith problem. Even the faithful can see it. I think we all voted
yes. And you're right. All of these comments that we made were a yes, but they're trying to do that and give it a decade or so, and there won't be that but. There won't be able to be that anymore. So wow. Yeah, fascinating. Well, I can't believe we covered it in 2 hours. I thought this would go on for 3 hours. Luckily, we all talk fast. But I hope you guys found this valuable. I hope there was good information. It was a good exercise for me, and I like to see, and I don't at all mean to disparage any faithful people that I grab their comments. It's just, it was like you said, Jessica, before on the top of the show, it was all of us. It's the kind of stuff that we would have said. It's our friends and relatives right now. It's the kind of stuff that they're saying. So there's nothing on anybody for making any of those things, but I feel like as time goes on, a lot of them will think, and who knows, if we were to take the same poll of these same people 5 years from now, there might be some different points of view. So I think that's an interesting, so you never know. So, All right. Well, please let us know in the comments. What do you think? Do we have a Joseph Smith problem? Does the LDS Church have a Joseph Smith problem? If we do, what the heck do we do about it? We didn't really address that, did we? So maybe that's another podcast, or maybe we just leave that alone. Landon, what do we do about it?
You stop talking about him, just like what we see they're doing.
Throwing fuel on the fire, aren't we? Oh my gosh, we're horrible. So anyway, please comment and let us know what you all think. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes drop, you can hit that notification bell. If you would like to help financially support the podcast, we have links in the show notes to Donor Box, and we absolutely love and appreciate every one of you that do. We just cannot tell you how much it means to us, and it allows us to continue, keep on keeping on. It really does make a huge difference to us. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. We also have links in the show notes to our merch store. We've got mugs and other fun Mormonish stuff. And we'd like to again thank Jessica. You were the perfect guest to have on and talk about all this. You had such really good insights and you were awesome. And thank you again, Landon, for all of your ranting. We love that. Everybody loves it.
This is what happens when you have a bad day at work and have to go do a podcast.
I was going to say, Landon did warn me at the top of the show. He goes, I am having the worst day. And I go, well, okay, channel that within reason onto the podcast. Like, we don't want to have Jessica and I just going, la, la, la. And every time Landon gets on, he's like, ah. We don't want to do that, but you did a good job. You kept it real and succinct, and you did it. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again for being with us on Mormonish, and we will see you next time. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.